Democracy, I think, as a principle, is when people, the citizens of a society, of a community, have an influence, have a voice in how their society is governed. I think in its fundamental core, that is what democracy is. I think there are a lot of people that confuse the principle of democracy with various manifestations of democracy. Because every time we have this argument, I don't know if you've particularly with those anti-democrats, look at the United States, that's not democratic, people are equal. And look at the UK, they have a different level. What is that? That's all you want to call that democracy. It's a very standard argument. But that is just their particular manifestation of the democratic principle.
I think that your definition of democracy, general, I agree with the general idea. I think that maybe there's a whole spectrum. You can just study democratic space, and you can, from maybe, let's say, the community having all of the controls over what the community does, versus maybe on this end, community electing representative leaders, and then the leaders have take the controls, and then the community gives feedback and input. There's a whole range, and I think that's important because sometimes you can label something, like for example, what's happening, what's the structure in the US with the corporations funding campaigns and all that. So you can have the democracy label, but if you're so off the scale, then the question arises that is that really sane?
I actually believe that is pretty accurate, and I agree to that, because it was when the Moors were in Spain at the height of Islamic civilization when they started going downhill. And that was precisely when this tendency of saying only this path, this is the only way you can possibly be a Muslim, and every other discussion to the left or the right is heresy, which created a lot of far more internal strife than had ever existed in the Muslim civilization prior to that. When you had that fight, and then obviously once you're fighting, then everybody says no, we're right, left, right, center, and things pretty much went downhill from there, and still is, because we have decided no, we want to get back to Islam 1200 from 1200 AD, which is a pretty arbitrary place to say, this is apparently where it's perfect. Okay, I'll get back to you, but you've been quiet for a bit now.
Yeah, I mean, as Chris, she's talking about the political perspective of democracy, but how I see democracy, in terms of a social system, in which the most common method, if we consider our democracy as a social system, then what I believe that even the most common man has the fullest of his contribution, to the best of his potentials, even in the norms and values, not just in the rules and regulations in terms of politics and states. Democracy has a certain definition because of the reason that every single one of us is basically, pretty much live less or more victim of our own arrogance, right? So we set very high standards for ourselves, but their compatibility in our social lives, in our political lives, in our life is very short. This is the very reason why democracy has a certain definition, but it has a lot of manifestations which are not on the scale, as you just mentioned earlier, right? So I believe, there are circumstances that actually drive it
so democracy is a result of outside pressures. Outside pressures, whichever they may be, influence a society to an extent where they have to adopt a democratic structure in order to survive.
Absolutely.
Okay. But it is not something that is inherently a part of our nature for everybody to be a part of the decision making.
Because if I have the power, I won't be thinking about providing you with the rights.
I agree.
basically think that at any given point in time, it's how you conceive of a system that will be functional to be able to satisfy the collective needs of any given configuration in a society. So basically, there have been, if we start using our value judgments to, sort of understand or analyze societies that had all kinds of relationships that were functional, that may not be egalitarian, that were in fact violent, that were in fact, subject to all kinds of restrictions and, even, so wars were also entitled within what was required for a, sort of system to survive. And it has never really been democratic because I don't really have, there's no society that has been studied by anybody in anthropologists, particularly where at least the gender disparity has never always existed.
So, nevertheless, and like I said, the democratic principle in Greece, in Athens, was still that there was only a certain segment of society that was enfranchised, that the rest weren't. Nevertheless, the principle there was still that within a group of people that are considered equal, everybody has the right to influence the way government works. So when we now, today are in a time in our history where, maybe not in reality, but in principle, we are all equal. In principle, we all claim that all human beings are equal. That means that everybody in a particular society is entitled to, is enfranchised, right?
We don't need to justify.
Yeah. But again, it's just you only have to justify when you're trying to tell somebody that, look, I'm different from you, but it's okay. The fact is, you're not different.
We don't have to defend Islam also.
Yeah, because it's not different.
We don't have to defend anything. We don't have to justify anything.
But people only.
When I was living abroad, you said it's a little and I used to, wonder why they were asking me questions, and I said, why are you asking me? I mean, I just didn't answer.
Yeah, but you see, the thing is,
never ask them for the religion. When they come and they ask you to look into the book, or they'll tell you, but this is you are dressed up like this. The book doesn't say that. Do we define and get introduced to every non-Muslim according to what the book says?
Apart from that, I think it's the narrative, and it is this media, and it is the general political discourse and everything, which they just seem to imbibe and develop their fears, and then they feel very superior, and they feel they have the right to generally be scared of you and to ask you questions, to treat you like some kind of an animal in a zoo or something like that.
But also look at what happened in France now about the veil.
Yeah, my brother and my wife are having a very, very severe online argument on this particular issue, because my wife supports the ban, whereas my brother, she was here, and my brother who lives in Denmark is very much against the ban. He's very much against it.
There is no justification for banning it.
Who within the system, so if you take the whole global capital system, somebody else may gain more ascendance, like for example China, Asia,
Latin America,
Indonesia, Brazil. So it's not, so things are changing.
I hope so, but like this operation there has scared the world, and they feel so smug that the world has realized the kind of technology that we have at our disposal and the kind of stuff that we can do. So, before we tie anybody who thinks that they can put up a challenge to us even collectively, we are far ahead of you. It's a very scary thought.
Well, American hubris is going to get them in the end. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry to cut this short. I have unfortunately been called back to work. It has always been a great pleasure. And thank you so much for being a part of the sessions. And I hope to see you again at the next session. And as usual, we have reached no conclusion.